So I want to show you how to get set up in Lightroom. When you first come into Lightroom, it should pull up the library tab. I guess I should say it might make you make a new catalog. It'll say, do you want to use the current catalog, which will have no images in it, or create a new one? So I'm just going to create a new one because I've of course already made plenty of catalogs on my computer. Go to New Catalog. And just a little refresher, what I normally do is I have my hard drive and a subfolder with my camera files, which is what I would suggest you name it. And then I have subfolders. I typically copy files over to the computer using my Finder browser, or I suppose on a PC, it's my computer, honestly, I don't remember. It's been a decade since I've had one. But I would assume that you know how to transfer files on whatever computer you have. So I have the files from my camera here. I'm going to select this folder here. And I like to make my catalog either in that folder that I've already created, or if you want to go the route of importing through the software, I would make a folder for catalogs. But since I keep my file structured this way, this is what I'm going to show you. So I'm going to make a file that matches the name of the folder that I'm putting photos into. So it becomes like a subfolder that always stays with those photos. Whatever you do, as long as your photos stay in the same place and your database, your Lightroom catalog stays in the same relationship to those photos so it can find it, you won't have any problems. But if you start moving around the .lrcat, it's a Lightroom catalog file, or the pictures in different locations, it won't be able to find it and you'll have to reconnect them. So I'm going to go ahead and make my subfolder, I suppose, and call it the same thing. Okay. Doesn't have to be exactly the same file name. All right, so that's going to close down my Lightroom software program and reopen it. So hopefully you see it again when it reopens here. And it's going to be empty, basically. So now we have to connect the photos to it. So I'm going to go down over to the left here and hit import. There's also a menu option to do imports. And I'm going to scroll through my files. It's already kind of found where I keep my photos, but you might have to go through your file structure to be able to find it by clicking on these little arrows. And I know this is all the way towards the bottom because it's one of the most recent folders I've made. And I'll click on that, and this will pull up all the photos in the catalog. So by default, it's going to check all the images. If you want to select some and not others, you could uncheck all, which would deselect all of them. I'll go ahead and do that. And I'll just grab a few photos. And whatever is highlighted now will do the same thing, basically. So if I want to grab this photo and this photo and this photo, I'm just going to hold down Command on a Mac. I believe it's Control on a PC in order to select individual files. If, however, I wanted to grab a series of them, I could click on one, hold Shift, and click on another, and it'll grab everything in between them. If you want to grab all of them, do Command A, and then you can hold down Command and unhighlight, I guess, make them so that they are not light gray. And then when you check the checkbox on one of them, it'll check the checkbox on everything else that is highlighted light gray. I'm just going to go ahead and grab all of these. And then what's important is what you have the setting for at the top here. Now, since I've already copied these files onto my hard drive where they're going to stay forever, I can just have it be add. That means it's going to add these images to the database. If, however, I wanted to move them from one location to another, you could click on Move. There's also Copy and Copy DNG. Now, I should say that if you were just inserting your SD card into the back of the computer, it could show up over here on the left, in which case you would want to be copying it over to your computer. And I should briefly explain what DNG is. So there are RAW files and there are JPEG files typically that are your options in the camera. And a JPEG file, the camera basically says, this is all the information I need to get a good picture, and it grabs what it needs and it throws out about half the information. What that means is that when we're editing in the software, we only have half the information that we could have in order to edit it. So you're a little bit limited in the kind of latitude of what you're able to manipulate and adjust. It's probably, as long as your exposure is really good and you have even lighting, you won't need to do any major adjustments, so JPEG is fine. On the other hand, RAW file is more comprehensive. The thing of it is that every RAW file out there, whether it's Canon or Nikon or Sony or Panasonic or whatever other brand you might have, when they make a RAW file for their camera, it is I guess a proprietary software, essentially. And so a Canon RAW file cannot be read by a Nikon camera or vice versa, or I suppose a Nikon versus Canon software program. So what Adobe did, wait, a little bit more to the story. What happens is that the manufacturers change their kind of software over time, and they improve their RAW file formats to maybe have more color or different ways of manipulating them. And the very early RAW file formats are no longer readable. They don't support them anymore. So even like Canon, which is what I'm using here, the camera that I had in 2000, those file formats are outdated and they don't really, they don't cooperate with software the same way as they used to. So Adobe has come in and said, hey, we'd really love to just standardize everything. Make one file format that we will always support, so you won't have any trouble in 20 years being able to open RAW files. And one that is kind of, you know, it'll work with everything across platforms. So they've guaranteed that, you know, 20 years, 50 years, 100 years from now, they will make their software so they can still read this DNG format. This is a digital negative group. It's made by a bunch of experts in the field that is kind of a platform that is collaborative and can work well. So anyway, that's why you might want to copy a DNG. If you know you're shooting JPEG, you don't want to do that, obviously, because you're just working with JPEG. But if you're working with RAW, it's a good idea to import them or to copy them over in this other file format. And then you will know that you'll be able to edit these files, you know, 20 years from now. So, all right, that's my description of that. In my case, I'm just going to do add. And it doesn't give me anything over here other than just some basic file handling things and things that you can apply and import. If you're doing move, you have to make sure that you're moving your files into the right place. By default, at least on a Mac, I'm not 100% sure about a PC, it's going to put them into the pictures folder on the hard drive. Now, if you're going to always work out of the pictures folder, that is actually a perfectly fine place for them to be. However, what I want to make sure to say is that when we're traditionally in person in a computer lab, you can't store files on the hard drive of those computers. I shouldn't say that. You can. You're not supposed to. The reason being that they do some support of the computers during the semester, particularly between semesters. So all files get wiped off between semesters. That's what I'm told, at least. And if a computer crashes, they're just going to wipe the hard drive. They're going to throw out the hard drive. You're never going to get your files back. If this is your personal computer, that's a perfectly fine place to put them, as long as you always remember that they're there. You have the option to put them all into one folder, or you have the option to organize them by date. I just so happens that everything I'm importing here, I think, was on one date. And so you can see, though, the structure here is that it puts it into a folder automatically, kind of organized the way that I organize my files, the year, the month, the date that they were photographed on. But you could also change them to say the date structure differently. And you could copy over the original folder, however that was. So hopefully you don't have to do this that much, but I always manually copy them over, and then I just add to the software program. The one thing I should say over here that I always import or apply when importing, and I have the name off here, but I'll open it up so you can see. Oh, I want to edit that. There we go. Is a metadata preset. And it appears that mine didn't save when I created it, but what I'll do is I'll create a new name. I don't know why it's not letting me edit the name. But basically what you want to do is you want to put in your copyright info. So I always go down here to the copyright creator. Oh, okay, it is already in here. My name and the year. I wouldn't bother with your address, that's more for companies, but your phone, if you want to put that out there, and particularly your email, and if you have a website, your website. And the idea with this is that if someone steals your images, it's actually really easy to prove that it's yours, because a lot of photographers don't know to check for copyright in the files. It's embedded in your files. It can be actually embedded in most cameras. And there was a story a year or two ago where a photographer was selling some equipment on Craigslist or something like that. Someone came and looked at it. They decided not to buy it. And the next day, their camera got stolen. The person selling, it was in their studio. Someone broke in, stole the camera, and within a few days, the person who was, looking to buy the camera started posting pictures that had the photographer who was selling the camera having their copyright embedded in the metadata of the photos. And so they were able to prove that this person broke in after seeing the camera and where it was stored and stole the camera, and the guy was able to get his camera back, basically. Long story short, tangent over. All right, so it's a good idea to put your copyright info in. I'm gonna hit done, and then we just go over here to import. And that will bring our files in. Let me scroll down. And I just want to kind of do a quick run through of the layout of our software program. Almost every tab has different information in it. There is a library tab, which is sort of for organizing your files. Develop, where you can actually do adjustments to them. We won't really use map, but if you have a GPS chip in your files, oh goodness. Okay, we're gonna scroll. If you have map enabled or your GPS enabled, you can show on a map where your files were taken. I don't believe that my camera has that, so I'm gonna skip this. You can do a book layout, which we're not gonna use. You could do a slideshow, which we're not really gonna use. We could use it for work in progress critique. But the print module, oh goodness, come on, go away. Print module is what we will probably use a lot for organizing our files to have a clean presentation around them, as well as making a proof sheet, which I'll get into in a later date, but it's a bunch of thumbnails basically, so we can give feedback on files at smaller scale. And then we're not really going to use web. So that's kind of the how to import and basic understanding of the software.